Today we're going to look at what Echinacea purpurea, or purple coneflower, looks like in every season of the year. So I have up on the screen information on Echinacea purpurea, so we can be sure we're talking about the same plant. Very important. And I will point out two things here. One, Echinacea purpurea can bloom for up to 4 weeks. So that's pretty awesome. And sometimes it will even rebloom like in the fall time. Also, awesome. And then I will also draw your attention to a perhaps surprising endangered status. So it is considered vulnerable, imperiled, and critically imperiled in some states in the United States. In Michigan, it is presumed extinct in nature. Overall, though, it is considered apparently secure, which is like one step down from secure. And that will surprise many people, but, you know, in nature, it does not compete particularly well with a lot of other plants, so you don't usually see it in like massive abundance. And then on top of that, many people don't grow it on their own, but will harvest it from nature and sell. Once they process it, they will sell it for its medicinal properties, because this is that echinacea, the echinacea where you can buy like a pill or a tincture to boost your immune system. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more later, but this is another reason though why it is in some trouble in some states, is because companies don't always grow it on their own like they should. They're going out and harvesting it in the wild for its medicinal properties. So today we're going to look at 4 different sites and follow Echinacea purpurea through the year. And I don't usually do this many sites. It's a lot. So you don't have to memorize these. I'll, remind you as we go along. But the first site is full sun. It's always weeded and watered. The second site, partial sun, mostly shade, not maintained at all. The third site is partial sun, sometimes weeded. And the last site is full sun, consistently weeded, watered, mulched. So I'll remind you as we go through of those different sites. So here we are, site 1, full sun, and this is early springtime, and this is late March for me, and you can see Echinacea purpurea starting to come up. Now these leaves look a little bit smooth, and you can see the edges have a little bit of serration, like little teeth on the edges a bit. And you can see a little bit of reddishness to the edge of the leaves, right? Now they don't always look like this when they come up. You'll see that in a minute, but this is what they can look like. Okay, so this is site 2, partial sun. It's mostly shaded, and this is what these look like coming up. So you see the leaf litter here. They have to break through all this leaf litter. And so I think that is partially why they look a little different than the last ones, right? And so these are more green. They don't have as much red, and they have a little more, they look a little more furry than the last ones did. And so here again, same site, early spring, late March. And you can see on the edges of the leaves, they have a little serration to them. But they look quite a bit different, actually, than this site. So we're back to this site again, site number 1. And these leaves are looking a little bigger now, right? So we've jumped to mid-spring, early April. This is like a week and a half later. And they're not as red anymore. And you can see there's more coming up. And purple coneflower is considered, as it comes up, a rosette. So it kind of makes a big circle as it comes up, which you can often tell when you look at it from above. So this is site 3. You won't see too much of this site. Partial sun, sometimes it gets weeded. And here it is coming up here. So this doesn't really have much of that red at all. It's got some green. And this one doesn't really have a lot of serration at the edges of the leaves, which is suspect. Anytime I see this, I'm like, is this purple coneflower? But it does end up being purple coneflower. So for this particular plant, I do find there is some variation in what it looks like when it comes up, which of course can be confusing. Okay, so mid-spring, we are, let's see, about a week after the last video. This is that first site again, and now most of that red is gone, isn't it? And this rosette of leaves is getting bigger. And now this little little guy here. You see all these little baby ones? Hello, little guys. Those are probably first year growth. So if you let the seeds of this, if you let some of them fall, or you pull some of them off and mash them into the soil a little bit, or rub them into the soil, you can get a nice little patch of purple coneflower going. First year growth, second year growth, do you know what I mean? And so this is site 2 again, partial sun, mostly shade. And here we are in mid-April, same day as that last video you just saw. And these are looking quite green, and they're coming up kind of tall. And again, I think they're trying to get over that leaf litter. And that leaf litter is good. A lot of pollinators and insects use that for cover. They can lay their eggs in it, and their eggs will overwinter in the leaf litter. And that's great. That's what you want. So this is, again, I think this is a lot of first year growth of purple coneflower. So those probably will not make flowers this year. It'll be next year. And so this is the 4th site, full sun. As you can see, all the mulch is down. And they weed and they water. They really, they're very intensive on their work here. And so on these leaves, you can see the edges are serrated a little bit, right? Like little teeth on the edges. So we've moved, we're still mid-spring, but this is late April for me. And so for you, you know, what is mid-spring for you, right? That's what they'll look like at that time. And so these are getting to be, I mean, I stuck my hand in there, maybe 4 inches tall. I mean, maybe this one is 8 or 9 inches tall, 6 inches maybe. And so the mulching is maybe not the best for native plants, because with native plants come our native pollinators, right? Our butterflies, our moths, our pretty little bees. And a lot of bees, most bees, make nests in the ground, right? And so when you do mulch, you don't really let them access the ground. And so you actually are inhibiting a lot of our pollinators from making their nests. So mulching is maybe not the best, right? All right, this is that first site again, full sun. And these are getting quite tall now, right? Nice and green. Okay, same full sun, first site again. Late spring, early May now. You could see all these other plants around here coming in. These guys are getting really big now. These are probably a foot and a half tall. I notice in the full sun sites, sometimes their stalks are more purplish reddish. And then here, in this partial sun site, mostly shade, the stalks stay a little bit more green for longer. And I haven't really read that anywhere else, and it's not always true. My observation, though, is in the more shaded sites, the stalks stay a little bit more greenish. And so there are a lot of purple coneflower here in this kind of unmaintained spot. And what you will see as they come up is there's a whole lot of the flowers, but there's a lot of not flowers, which is to say this patch is sort of ever growing. And there's a lot of first year growth down there that is not going to flower, or probably won't flower this year. And then look at these 2 different leaves. I mean, one of them, the edges are like sort of a neat little serrated, and the other one, they're kind of bigger jaggedies. Variation in our purple coneflower. So still late spring, but it's mid-May now, about a week after the last video you just saw. And these are getting, you know, ever taller. These are 9 to 12 inches tall now at that second site. So they say these leaves are, what are the words they use? Well, sort of oval and sort of lance shaped at the same time. Ovate, is that the word they use? Well, whatever. And so down at the ground here, you get a lot of these basal leaves that sort of form a rosette if you have very distinct little patches. But here, it's sort of a lot of different plants growing together, so you don't get that rosette as easily to be seen. So here is the first site, that full sun site, that is well maintained, but they don't mulch. And you can see more of a rosette. And so already here in mid-May, you can see that some of these stalks are starting to come up quite tall, and in some of them you can start to see some buds at the top. And so this is early summer now, early June, This is that partial sun, mostly shaded site. And now these are definitely a foot and a half tall. And with purple coneflower, you get more leaves at the bottom. And then as you come up these stalks, especially the stalk that's going to have a flower, see there's a little buds in there. That's going to be a flower. Look at the, hello. Sorry. As you get taller on each stalk, usually the leaves get smaller, and you get less leaves. Yeah, this one's a really good example of the serrated edges, and they are mostly smooth, and the stalks have little white hairs on them. You can see that. And then again, these ones are mostly green. There's some purple and some streaks of purple. Some of the other full sun ones are almost entirely purple. Yeah, these are looking really good. How healthy do these look? And the leaf litter also holds moisture into the soil, which is nice for these plants, especially as they overwinter too. So for both our pollinators and our plants, it is really good to just kind of leave the leaf litter. So here's our fourth site, the one that gets mulched. You can see we've got buds here. Look at them. They're getting there. And then the stalks, look at them. You can see the little white hairs, and you can see how reddish they are in this full sun site. So there's one that already popped up and gave us a bloom here in early summer. For me, that's early June. And I think there's one other bloom in this area, which is wild. It's a little early. I will say from year to year, you're looking at a compilation of a bunch of different years. There's definitely variability in how much sun they get as to when they bloom, but also year to year. Some years they can be even a couple weeks earlier or later. So this is early summer, early June in that partial sun site. And so now you see some of these holes in these leaves? That's good. That's good stuff. So if you see holes in your leaves, totally don't freak out. Be cool. Stay cool. It means that our insects are munching on your leaves a little bit, and that's a good thing. You can't get a little micro habitat, a little mini ecosystem going in your yard if you don't let insects and animals nibble a little bit, right? And so a lot of our caterpillars our butterflies and our moths. I mean, we love to see floating butterflies, but butterfly babies are caterpillars. And you know what caterpillars eat? They eat leaves on our plants. And so when I see little holes on plants, like these purple coneflower, I think, oh good, some little caterpillar was eating here. They're going to turn into a big, beautiful butterfly, right? So don't freak out if you see little holes in your leaves. It's cool. And if you don't spray, don't do anything. If you leave it in like a year, maybe, sometimes less, sometimes more, the predators for different insects start to come in and they start to eat the insects that are eating your plants. And then you really got like a whole little ecosystem going, right? So stay calm. And you can really support all your pollinators by not spraying. And so here now, site 1, full sun, and this is site 4, full sun. And you can see now we're getting blooms. So this is still early summer, but for me, this will now be late June. And sometimes it's later than this that they will bloom. And sometimes it's just a tick earlier. And so, of course, you can see these beautiful purple flowers, right? Of course. Sometimes the purple's a little darker. Sometimes it's a little lighter. In some rare examples, naturally, it can be white sometimes. You can buy hybrid purple coneflowers that are white. At the end of this video, maybe I'll talk a little bit about hybrids and why maybe it's not such a good idea to get hybrids. But so here we are, and these are about 3 feet tall. And if you maintain them just so, you can really keep them in little patches. You can keep them in a little rosette and have a few of those in your yard if you really like the neat and tidy look. And so if some of those seeds drop and little bits of growth come up next spring, you can pull those out and give them to a friend or something, right? And so as you're looking at this, I mean, this is what we come here for, people, right? Is to see these beautiful when they're in bloom. And as you're looking at these flowers, let me tell you something about these flowers. So what we are calling a flower, each of those little pokey things in the middle is actually an individual flower. And each of what looks like a flower petal to us is actually an individual flower. What do they call those? composite flowers, or am I making that up? I might be making that up. Anyways, and so inside or next to each of those pokey things coming out, are those called disc flowers? And then the petals, each individually, is called a ray flower. I think that's right. And those pokey flowers in the middle, each one of those have male and female reproductive parts. And then each of those purple petals coming off, I think they only have male reproductive parts in them. The female part is missing. So the purple petals are sterile flowers, and like the pokey little disc flowers there in the middle are fertile, regular old flowers. And it's hypothesized, the middle pokey things, that's really where all the pollination happens, and we're going to get our seeds and everything. And the sterile flower petals that are flowers are there just to attract pollinators. That's why they're there, because they're sterile, right? So that's neat. So there's actually a whole lot of flowers on each, what looks to us like single flower. That's very cool. You have to admit that's cool. It's super cool. And so some caterpillars eat the leaves of this plant. There are a whole bunch of caterpillars for some moths that eat the flower itself, like those petals and like the little disc flowers in there. So sometimes you might see a caterpillar on your actual like flower head, and you'd be like, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on the leaves? And for some of them, no, they shouldn't be on the leaves. This is where they belong. And so a purple coneflower is neat when those petals come up from the sides, right? They just start around the edge. They're just a little purple and they poke straight up. Then they get taller and taller and the petals get bigger and bigger. And then they start to recurve until they're like pointing downward, right? Making sort of a little cone, right? Coneflower. And part of how you get these 4 weeks of blooms is that you can see some of these flowers are bloomed. Some are not yet blooming. They're still like buds. And then some of them are getting to already be done. So that is part of how you can get such a long blooming period, is they kind of have new ones coming up all the time, right? So this is that full sun site, and you can see these stems are greenish. And I had said often in full sun I see red. Well, here the stems are greenish. So there you go. Variability. I don't always understand it. And so this one right there I'm showing you, that's not going to bloom this year. That'll just stay like that. But next year that'll put up some nice blooms. And so what was just a little rosette in the springtime of leaves coming up have now come into these very big bunches. And so underground, each little rosette, each purple coneflower has some short woody rhizomes. I have a video on native plant rhizomes I'll link you to in the description to understand what that is. And then they have a little bit of fibrous roots too. And so each little like rosette is usually actually technically just one purple coneflower plant. Underground, it's all connected as one root system. So there's that. And so here's this site too, this partial sun, mostly shaded site. And these are not yet bloomed. It's early July now, midsummer. There's some that are bloomed in the back. And these are maybe 3 feet tall. They could be a little taller than that, maybe almost 4. And most of them are not yet bloomed in this shady, mostly shady area. But they're getting there. Yeah, so that one is like flat and they're all pointed out, and those petals are going to get bigger yet and then start to fold downwards. So this is the third site. You don't see it much, this partial sun site. Not maintained a lot, but sometimes weeded. And so you can see this stalk is mostly green with a couple purple streaks in it right around the 4th of July here. I had black nails. I was going to redo them for the 4th of July right after that video. And so also early July here, same site, different purple coneflower. Okay, and this is a few days later. And so just a few days later, a whole lot more of them are blooming now in this partial sun, mostly shaded, not really maintained site. And so once they start to get this tall, the leaf litter that had been left down there, you don't really even see it anymore, right? And so you know, again, it's like a nice natural mulch. It allows the insects to do their life cycles as they do. And if you understand a lot about that, you're like, yeah, totally. And if you don't understand a lot about their life cycles, well, who cares? You just know that insects use it in the way that insects do. And then when these are big and beautiful and blooming, who's looking at the ground? So here's that site 3 again. So this is mid-July now, midsummer still. About a week and a half from the last video, still bloomed here. And so this one, so some of those petals have been munched off. So that could have been a caterpillar. That could be, oh my gosh, we have deer, we have rabbits, we have nasty little marmots. Who can say who munched it? So this is that site 1, but in a different year. And so you can see these rosettes of purple coneflower are still, at this time, this was an earlier year, is still filling in to get the kind of robust patch that they have now. But you can see, okay, so a lot of the stems are the more reddish color. You can see all these bumblebees around. Do you see all these bumblebees? And you can see the different, as the flower opens up, I like to see all the different stages as they bloom, which is very beautiful. So Echinacea, the medicine, has been used here since before Europeans came, right? Native Americans were using Echinacea. So it can be the petals, the stems, the leaves, and also the roots to make medicine. And so we have data now to support what the Native Americans were doing, and it actually does, in fact, help with colds and illness. And so a lot of doctors and folk practitioners and Native Americans all use this Echinacea plant to help, let's see, coughs, colds, sore throat, toothache, snake bites, poisoning, bee stings, rattlesnake bites. I already said snake bites. So it does actually have, and we have data supporting, that it has antioxidant properties, antibacterial, antiviral, larvicidal, and it supports our immune system. It's immunostimulatory and anti-inflammatory. It's even anti-anxiety and anti-depression. And I looked at some papers where they were extracting some of the, like getting some extracts of it, and they really did. It inhibited growth of all sorts of different fungi and bacteria, which is amazing. And so it's not like a folktale. It's real. Echinacea really does help us out. And so here you can see these bumblebees. So bumblebees don't have a lot of energy to go from flower to flower. And so sometimes when they need a break, they just take a nap on a flower. There's no reason to go back to their nest. They'll just take a nap, and then after a little bit, they'll start moving again, which is kind of funny. Did you know you can pet bumblebees? Yeah, they're not very aggressive. You can just give them a little pet. And when they're annoyed with you and like maybe they will sting you, they stick up one of their legs. So if you pet one and their little leg comes up, then you'd be like, oh, all right, bumblebee, I'll leave you alone, man. So this is that site 3. This guy got broken in half. You see that? So the top got nipped off altogether, and then this one little thing got like knocked down. And so you can see this little flower though is still blooming. And so we're going to follow that guy a little bit to see how she fares. And so, you know, after you exercise, especially intense exercise, your immune system is suppressed for a little bit. So Echinacea actually shortens the amount of time that your immune system is suppressed after intense exercise. How cool is that? But now it doesn't like totally prevent all illness. If you get a cold, the best, most like quantitative data I saw said that you'll have your cold if you take Echinacea for 6 days versus 9 days if you don't take anything. So, you know, it helps a little bit. And so now we can see, this is late summer, late August for me. This is at site 4 that's highly maintained and mulched. And you can see some of these are still beautiful purple flowers, obviously. But a lot of them now, their petals are starting to, they often will get more and more pale as the season goes on. And then they'll start to get little brown at the edges and then crinkly. And then at some point the petals fall off. And remember, each of those petals is like its own flower. And then look what you got there. Do you see that guy in the middle? That is a finch. So finches especially love the seeds of Echinacea purpurea. They love purple coneflower seeds. So those little seed heads, those little pokey guys, each one of those will have a seed in it. And then these birds love to come and eat those seeds, which is awesome. And if you look up and around, kind of in the middle left, there's another bird that was just in there, another finch. If you like, and on the right, there's another one. So they give you a pollinator show. Okay, so this is right where that finch was. So I'm going to zoom in here and try to show what seeds that finch was going for. And so you get a pollinator show of butterflies and bees. And then once they start to make their seeds, you get a bird show. So people are like, oh, you can deadhead them and they look tidier. No, they don't. Don't do that. You want to feed our birds too, right? And you like elongate the show that you get. You can look out your window and watch all these finches. And I see sparrows too. Does anyone else see that? Coming to eat the seeds off the top of these purple coneflowers. And then, well, and I'll show you this. I actually think these seed heads are really pretty in the wintertime, as opposed to like cutting everything down to the ground like some people do. And so if you just leave those stalks up, and you'll see what this looks like, all through the winter, those stalks stay upright. And the idea is to hold those seeds up for birds that come through. So migratory birds can come and eat those seeds, as well as the birds that hang around in the wintertime. And so you're providing food for our native birds, which is really important too. And you get to see the show of the birds coming. And these little seed heads all through the winter is like interesting to look at. Visual interest, as opposed to cutting everything down to the ground, which is boring to look at, really. A number of bees make nests in the ground. A lot of bees make nests in the stalks of our native plants. Cool, right? So different insects will inject eggs into the stalks, or they themselves will go into the stalks to overwinter. Or in the springtime, a lot of bees will put their eggs and make little nests in these stalks. So more reasons to keep the stalks up and keep them going is a lot of our pollinators that we love and love to see use these stalks. And if you can't stand it, you're like, no, native flower power, I'm not leaving these up. Oh, here's another bird. Hi, finch. I'm not leaving these up. I don't care about the bird shows. You can trim them maybe a foot from the ground, foot and a half. See next to the road there, see that finch? I just love when the birds come in. I really like finches, they're pretty. Anyways, you can cut the stalk maybe a foot or a foot and a half from the ground. And the stalks are, many of the purple coneflower stalks are hollow. And so pollinators and bees can still come and use stalks if you trim them maybe a foot or a foot and a half from the ground. If you just have to do something. But again, I think, man, keep those seed heads up. They're really cool to look at, and they do a lot. So this is what that bird was on. This was the one. And so the leaves here in early fall, so we're in early September, they're starting to yellow and starting to wilt a little bit, but a lot of them are still green, right? And then these seed heads. So again, those petals, those didn't make any seeds. It's just those disc flowers in the middle, the pokey flowers, that make the seeds. So here's our bent one. And look. So those holes in the flowers and the flower petals, that'll be a caterpillar of some kind, got a snack, which is good. And that flower is still doing okay, right? So the fruit is considered a cypsela. Some people say it's an achene, but they're wrong. It's a cypsela, which is a dry one chamber with a single seed inside, developing from an inferior ovary. And I know what you're thinking. Native flower power, tell me more. It's a cypsela? Well, how are you so sure that it's not an achene fruit? Says nobody. So each of these little black pokey things is like the chamber, and then the seed is on the inside. Okay, so early fall, late September now. Here's that partial sun site. It gets more shade in the fall, of course, as the leaves on the tree above fall. And so the leaves here are going to start to fall, and they're yellowing, of course, as I said. So another popular native plant are black-eyed Susans. So black-eyed Susans actually get more visitors from pollinators, but purple coneflower has a greater diversity of pollinators. Interesting. So that little thing I was just showing you was another bud, because sometimes you get another bloom later in the season, but that one will not end up doing another bloom. We had a hard cold that came in, and so some of these that were going to give a second bloom ended up not blooming. And so this is common. So now you can see here we're in mid-fall, late October. You still get some of these leaves along the ground, some of these more basal leaves. And then along that stalk, most of the leaves are totally gone, right? Yeah. And so now you just get these black seed heads popped up. And this is where it starts to look really cool again to me. And so these are the crispy leaves. Those will just fall off to the bottom and you just leave them. It's fine. And there might be insect eggs on there and stuff. So like, cool, just leave those. And those basal leaves, so depending on where you live, some of those leaves at the bottom will stay for a really long time. Sometimes they can almost stay the whole year. And in other, especially if they're like underneath a little bit of leaf litter, kind of, that can help keep them warm, so to say. But if you live somewhere very cold, or sometimes it gets very cold and snowy, sometimes you won't have any of those leaves at the bottom. Those won't stay. So it kind of depends what happens with your weather. Where I live, sometimes they're there all year, sometimes they're not. So this is that same site, early winter, early December. So look at all these seed heads. Yes, this does look cool now, right? Right, this is why you leave them up. And there's still lots of seeds on there, so lots of birds can still come, which is what you want. And then see what I'm doing with my finger? I'll do that sometimes, or like rip some off very unceremoniously, and I'll like rub them into the dirt. You want seeds to touch dirt. That's how you know, like, okay, these will germinate. And that way I can keep like a patch of purple coneflower going. But yeah, man, keep these up. How cool do these look? And then down at the bottom here, even under the leaf litter, there's really no green leaves left. And so this is that site 3. So the green leaves you see down there, that's not from purple coneflower. That is something else. The purple coneflower leaves are gone. So this is midwinter, mid-January. Snow on the ground. And as you can see, I obviously leave my stalks up, which helps me know where to find my purple coneflower next year. You know what I'm saying? And then here, a lot of the seeds that were on this little seed head are gone. So birds came and got those. And so those did good. Even that one little flower on that bent over stalk, it did all right. So this is that site 1, that full sun site. See, look how stripped bare that is now. Some birds really got into that. How cool would it have been if you could have seen that show? And so I'm showing you here, these stalks are all brown now. And they're hollow, or some of them are hollow, some aren't. And I call them standing dead at this point because the plant won't use them again next year. This is it for them. But the pollinators use them. And I thought this was a little tiny one. He didn't get very tall. He was very unhappy. But you can see the little snow on top of their seed heads. I thought that was funny. So late winter, late February. So there's a stalk. You can see it's a little hollow. And so different types of bees, so like there's tons of different types of bees, and different types of bees use different sized holes in stalks to make their nests. And so some of the milkweeds have real wide holes for their stalks, and like these maybe are a little bit more narrow. Any sized hole is fine in a stalk because different bees use different sized holes. So that's cool. And I'm rooting around here, seeing in late February for me if any new growth is coming up. Like, are my purple coneflower? Well, these aren't mine, but are these purple coneflowers coming up this year? And they're not yet. So late winter, late February again, a little bit later. Still standing dead stalks, but nothing's coming up yet. So I'll give you a link in the video description to some of the different pollinators that will come and visit, in case you want to know. Like, there's a whole lot of them. There's a whole list. And so here we are back in early spring, late March for me. And here we are back at that first site, and you can see these leaves coming back. And now you see these stalks on the ground. Now you know like where those came from. And so the people at this site, they knock them down, but they leave them there. So you could do that. I, again, just leave them up. And this is that mostly shady partial sun site. And again, these are those ones coming up through the leaf litter. Some of the stalks got knocked over and some didn't in that location. So that's it. That is Echinacea purpurea in every season of the year. And you got to see some of the variation in what it looks like as it comes up, which is kind of neat. So I had said at the beginning of this video that I might talk about hybrids at the end, so purple coneflower hybrid. So a hybrid is like, after you see the name, purple coneflower, on a tag, it'll have like in quotation marks after it, it'll say purple coneflower bright star, or purple coneflower razzmatazz, or like purple coneflower white luster, or something like that. That's a hybrid. But you know what? I'm not going to talk about hybrids here and kind of what that means and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or like, does it matter? I'm actually just going to make a separate video. That makes more sense. So I will give you a link in the video description to that separate video on hybrids and purple coneflower, so you can kind of decide for yourself what you think about that particular issue. Other than that, man, get out there and plant native. Plant some Echinacea purpurea.